Oh, fuck yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Look at that. Having this thing sitting around for almost a fucking month. Oh, yeah. What's that, Steve? Oh. What up, fuckers? So, I was in the middle of doing some custom work, grinding some customs, just shipping out drop knives, and I was working on customs of this exact knife. This, if you don't know, this is the Exodus, my Exodus model. This is my bushcraft style knife. This particular one is in Pop's Pro Cut, as you can see. This is Pop's Pro Cut, obviously saber ground, glass blasted and tumbled. It's got some oil on it. Actually, well, anyway, with this gorgeous vintage toasted wheat linen micarta, they say, and I was able to keep some of that bark that's on there. So if you're a new maker, somebody getting into knives, and you'll hear vintage micarta thrown around. You'll hear Westinghouse is probably the most popular one. All Westinghouse is vintage. Not all vintage is Westinghouse. If that makes sense. Vintage just means it's an old, 50, well, maybe not even that old. It could be 40, 50 years, depending on how old it is. Anyway, Westinghouse, micarta, is actually the trademark name of organic materials pressed in a phenolic resin is what it actually is. Technically, micarta, micarta is the trade name that Westinghouse came up with when they actually created it. So Westinghouse is the most desired because two reasons. One, it's the original. Two, they don't make it anymore. And they haven't since, I think, the early 90s. Well, I take it back. I know the company got bought by like CBS or some shit in the 90s. I don't know if they were still making micarta. Most of the stuff you find is like 70s and earlier. That's why it's the most desired. And some of that stuff is pretty fucking wild. It's formulas that they were doing back then with spun glass, all kinds of crazy shit, rag and all that. And it's definitely different. I've used it. It's definitely a much harder micarta, whatever their formula was. It's much harder than the newer stuff. Doesn't mean it's any better or any worse. The cool thing about vintage is a lot of the vintage stuff is mess-ups. So a lot of vintage, I'm here to talk about knives, I'm talking about micarta. A lot of the vintage stuff is actually mess-ups. Some of it's was meant to be like that, but the cool thing about vintage is a lot of that stuff gets found because it was a mess-up. Like the color was a shade off. It's a beautiful color, but it's not what it was meant for. Like I said, rag micarta is just that. So basically you could take any organic material, canvas, linen, burlap, rags made out of cotton, whatever, and they basically soak it in a phenolic resin and then press it with heat. Almost not sintering, but they press it with heat and pressure, and it creates this it was called the steel of plastics. Obviously it's completely waterproof. It's extremely wear resistant. It's extremely strong. Which is really good for use in things that you need, that marine applications, aerospace applications, things where you would need all kinds of. They still use them for big circuit boards and stuff like that. It's very, very cool stuff, and it makes an excellent knife handle for those same exact reasons. The cool thing about vintage, about any micarta, or really anything made with phenolic resin, is phenolic resin gets aged with UV light. It patinas with UV light. And the older it gets, the more dramatic that is. So actually, I wish I had the scales out here, because I think I have a set left. When I got this scale, it was this chestnut brown color. It's originally, well, it was probably closer to the camera's making it look a bit yellow, but it's much more of a tan color. It's like a tan yellow. It's probably more of a tan color. Then it ages to this kind of yellow, and you can see the little speckles in there of who knows what that is. You see that a lot with vintage stuff. It's got all these little speckles. And then what happened is this: when you get the scales, they're this brown color, and then as I shape it, so The brown is the patina. Patina is brown like that. Sometimes you get patina, as you actually see here on the inside of the scales. So if you take these scales off, because these are removable, you can take them off and you'll see. Can you see that brown? It looks almost like a brown liner on both sides right there. That's actually patina. So one side of the scale, the other side of the scale was a sheet, and the UV light just from the atmosphere, from outside and whatnot, or just inside, will turn it that brown color. So if you take these scales off, it'll be a brown color on that side. So it almost makes it look like liners, but that's just the micarta right there, which is really cool. And as you carry this knife, it will eventually start turning back to that. And depending on where you grab the knife and where you hold it and what part gets exposed more or less, you will end up with different shades of that chestnut brown based on your hands and stuff like that. But like I've seen guys who, when they carry the knife outside, like on their hip, like this part of the knife right here will be like a real like chestnutty brown, and then this part will end up fading into like more of this color because this is what's sticking out of the sheath, and the sunlight and ambient light gets to it more. So anyway, this stuff's fucking gorgeous. I didn't know it was vintage when I bought it. I didn't read. And then see, you can see you can see like the lines right there. Almost looks like liners, but yeah. So that's what micarta is. It's anything canvas, linen, burlap, paper. It's just organic stuff with that anyway. So I had this. I made this up to do this toughness testing, and then as I was grinding the custom knives, I remembered that I had heat treated a few of these to put up on the website, and then I got into the Nitro X7 stuff, and that all got sidelined. So, quick side note, if anybody wants one of these, I didn't make a lot of them because I don't know how many people are interested in a... This is a bushcraft style knife. This is a, like I said, it's saber ground. It's a convex saber grind. So we're about 130,000 the spine. It's about 20 thousandths behind the edge right here through here, and then up here at the tip is about 25. It's a little thicker. Fat ass robust tip. Because we all like a thick tip. Am I right, ladies? I 90 degreed the spine because some guys, and the other ones I was leaving them tumbled. But you don't need a 90 degree spine to throw sparks. I don't know why the bushcraft community hasn't figured that out yet, but they prefer it that way, so that's fine. So I just make it nice and shiny shine so you can throw sparks with it. This is in Pop's Pro Cut, and the reason I did that is because I wanted to do some toughness testing. We did edge retention testing, and it was fucking phenomenal. Since then, I don't know if it's necessarily say it's been discovered, and any steel technically kind of falls under this, just Pro Cut's just much more to the extreme. Any steel you have, when you're, generally speaking, almost all steels, the higher, there's an austenitizing range. When you heat it up in the oven, there's a range, right, of of maybe 100 degrees or so. And technically you can go as high as you want, but you run into more problems. Anyway, the lower end of that austenizing temp, right, you will, how do I say this? The higher you austenitize, the harder the steel generally gets. So if you austenitize at, let's say it's 1095, and you austenitize it at 1425, it'll come out of the quench at 62. And if you austenitize it at 1525, it'll come out at 66. Okay? Just giving it, I don't know if that's the exact heat treat number, but let's just, make easy numbers. The reason for that, if you don't know, is the higher the austenitizing temp, right, the more it runs through that range, the more carbon gets dissolved. So when you see like steel just sitting around, like annealed like this, like a piece of steel, the carbon it's been poured, annealed, and normalized, and the carbon is all bound up in little carbides, right, in there, in a martensenic steel. In order to make it hard, we take it to the austenitizing temp, that carbon dissolves, and then if we quench it fast enough, based on whatever the steel is, whatever that curve is for that steel, we trap that carbon in between the molecules of the steel, and it makes the steel hard. Okay? That's how you get hard steel. Hard. Like wiener. The higher you austenitize, so the hotter you make the steel, the more carbon will dissolve. So the more carbon dissolves, the harder it gets. This is not infinite. You can't just austenitize to the moon, but generally speaking. In steel, we have carbides. Carbides are either, you have cementite carbides, which is just iron and carbon, right? They're the softest. And then you have alloying elements. So for instance, chromium in a stainless steel. Chromium will bind with the carbon and form a chromium carbide, or vanadium will form a vanadium carbide, and so on and so forth. So what happens is, now, right, we take the steel hotter. So the hotter we make the steel, the more carbon dissolves, the harder the steel gets. When that carbon dissolves, it's dissolving from a carbide. So if it was a stainless steel, let's say it releases some of the chromium carbide. This is how stainless steel becomes stainless. So when the steel is annealed and you buy it from the foundry, all the chromium is bound up with the carbon in carbides. Once it hits the austenizing temperature, that carbon dissolves, releasing the chromium into solution, releasing the carbon into the solution means into the steel. It's not a little rock anymore, it dissolved. When steel is at austenizing temp, it's what's called a solid state solution, which means think of it fluidly on the inside, like almost like water, like salt and water, it dissolves, exact same thing. So it, maybe not exact, but you get it. It dissolves. Then when we quench it, right, we lock that carbon in between the molecules of the steel, which hardens it, but we also keep that chromium gets locked into the ocean of the steel. And then when we cool it all the way, it reacts with oxygen and forms an instantaneous layer of chromium oxide, which is what makes the steel stainless. This is why, so the hotter we austenitize a steel, the harder it gets, because that carbon dissolves, and we trap more carbon to make it harder. Same way with stainless steels, the hotter you austenitize, Kershaw and everyone else, which is so funny with MagnaCut, because it makes really no sense with MagnaCut, but any steel, for any knife company out there that wants to come out, sometimes you see them justifying low Rockwell numbers, low hardness numbers, because they say it improves corrosion resistance. It's the exact opposite. So like I said, you have that chromium carbide, right? And then you heat the steel up to austenizing temp, and some of it dissolves, right? And then carbon gets locked in and chromium gets locked in. What do you think happens as we raise the temp, right? And more carbon dissolves. More chromium dissolves because it's bound up with it, right? So more chromium dissolves, that puts more chromium in solution. So generally speaking, the higher we austenitize a stainless steel, the more chromium dissolves in solution, thus the more stain resistant it becomes, the more corrosion resistant it becomes. So a higher austenizing temp will give you a more stainless steel. Now it can be pretty dramatic depending on the steel, especially even some like tool steels, like Crewware and stuff like that. You can actually, those are the ones you really see a big difference with, because it's not a stainless steel, so there's only so much chromium that can be released, because it's like 7 or 8%. So if you do austenitize it higher, you will actually see a significant difference. But you'll see it with all of them. But anyway, the point of that is the higher you austenitize, the more carbon dissolves, the more carbides dissolve. So you get less carbides at higher austenizing temps, right? But you get harder steel. So you're always trying to play that balance. With most steels, you're trying to find a good middle ground where you get the steel sufficiently hard enough to where you want it, and you keep as many carbides as you can. So then we have the carbides that do the cutting at the edge and the hardness to keep those carbides in place and maintain that apex. Pro cut, and again, it is unique, I guess you could say. It is, because this process happens with any steel, but with Pro cut, it's much more profound. So with Pro cut, it has a super duper wide austenitizing range. And I'll be the first to say here, there's been continued heat treating data being going on with Pro cut. And originally the austenitizing temps were from 1450 to 1650. And the guys at Pops came up with like the two protocols. So there was like the Pro Cut E for edge retention protocol, which was like 1500 degrees or something like that, which would leave more carbides in solution. And the Pro Cut T for toughness, where it was a higher austenizing temp, which was less carbides. Real quick, carbides are hard little balls that are inside the steel matrix, okay? The less carbides, the higher the toughness. This is why simple carbon steels are much tougher than a stainless steel, because they have far, far, far less or no carbides. So the more homogeneous the steel looks like under a microscope, and the finer the grain is, the finer that microstructure is, the tougher it is. There's less chances for cracks. It's more solid, right? If you got a big knot under there, a big ball in there, it's an easy spot for a crack to start, right? Or propagate, like they like to say. Pro cut So that range was about 200 degrees. So I think it was like 1450 or something like that, all the way up to 1650. For me, for the edge retention, I did 1550. I felt that was the ideal range. 1550 was my happy spot for edge retention, and it did really well. If you go up to what happens is, once you cross that 1600, 1650 range, the carbides start dissolving very quickly. And you go from about, I want to say at 1500 degrees, let's say, or 1550, I think at 1500 degrees or 1450 or 1500, there was like 6 or 7% carbide volume. Where at 1650, there was like 2 or less. So it was a huge drop. So that huge drop in carbide volume means a huge bump up in toughness. The cool thing about Pro Cut that makes it really, really wild is you, at that higher austenizing temps, you get so much carbon release, right? And I'm assuming it's because of the tungsten. It's very resistant to tempering. It's very temper resistant, you could say, because of the tungsten, because tungsten does help with red hot hardness. Not in this steel, but that you can end up getting very high Rockwell numbers with high tempers and high austenizing temps. So, like I said, you would go from 1450 to 1650. They've even done some testing now, I believe, in 1700 and 1725. So at 1725, you get... I'm assuming the carbide volume goes to near nil, but the Rockwell was at 450 degree temper. I believe the Rockwell was still coming out with no cryo at 60 and a half to 61 Rockwell. So you still got pretty damn good hardness. And I want to say the toughness was at like 50 foot-pounds, which is like 5160 level, like leaf spring steel level. Crazy. So, these knives that I heat treated, these right here, were done with that temper, that heat treat protocol. These were all these were 1650 or 1700 and a 425 or 450 degree. I got to find the numbers exactly. Temper. These all came out at 62 Rockwell. Okay, and they should have north of 40 pounds of toughness, which is crazy. Again, when I see that, so we can have relatively high hardness. Show me a bushcraft knife that's in the 62s. It's usually 1080, 1095, 58 Rockwell for toughness, and they're thick as fuck. Me, because me being a caveman, I don't know why we don't see this. Probably has to do with money. I want to exploit that. So rather than making a 58 Rockwell 1080 knife at 3/8 thickness, so it's thick and it's soft and everyone can beat on it, let's exploit what Pro Cut does best, which is really, really high toughness numbers at relative hardnesses. Let's use thinner stock. This is just over, I think it's 132 thou. Or 130 thou. Like just over, it's either 130 thou, I believe these are. So it's just over 1/8 of an inch. So 1/8 is 125. So this is 5 thou over that, right? So give or take. I do these by hand. So 125 to 130 thou, somewhere in that ballpark. So it's 130 thou, right? That's thinner than the stock at the top of a paramilitary 2, a PM2, just so we're clear. Okay? And then down to 20 thou behind the edge here. Like I said, about 25 here, because this is where we want a little thickness for prying and stuff like that. That is also as thin or thinner than your para 2 or para 3, for reference. So the geometry of this knife, back here, up to the tip, PM2s and para 3s get very, very thin, get really pretty thin. But the geometry of this is of that of your PM2. So if you think a PM2 is super slicey, this is going to feel very similar. But we're going to do some toughness testing with it. We're going to hammer some fucking nails, and we're going to do some tip testing, and we're going to pry, and we're going to see what we can get with it. This is the same formula that I use on... Hold on. Wait for it. This is going to take forever. My pry bars. So see how there's a little Pro Cut T right there? Pro Cut T for toughness. So same protocol. So we're going to use the same protocol that we make pry bars out of to make knives out of. Usually we wouldn't want to do that. The reason we do want to do that is because, like I said, we can get, ideally, not just a very, very, very tough steel at 35, 40 foot-pounds of toughness, which is, just to put this in perspective, everybody likes to think about 1095 as this amazingly tough steel. At 62 Rockwell, this steel has, I don't know the exact numbers, but 3 to 4 times the toughness of 1095 at 60 Rockwell, or maybe even 59. I got to find the exact numbers. Maybe I'll go try to look it up when I pause this to set up to beat on it. Okay, just so we have, so at a higher Rockwell, remember the Rockwell scale is logarithmic. It's not just fucking linear. It gets significant. So the difference between 60 and 62 is much bigger than 58 to 59. So at sub 60, right? So at 62, this has better toughness than 1095 does at sub 60. Just so we're clear. And these have, look at those scales. Sorry. I was so stoked when I started cutting into these. I love vintage micarta. I love things that move. So again, it's a carbon steel, so this will patina as will your handle. So the whole thing will change with you, which I think is always super cool. Yeah, so we're gonna, so that's why I'm using this steel. This is why every knife maker who does anything in 1095 should just start using Pro Cut, because there's no reason not to anymore. Like, there's zero. And we're gonna find out. I'm gonna hammer through some stuff. I'm just a big fan of this. So I think overall on this is 9 inches. Handle's like 5. Blade is that blood? Blade's 4 inches. Or 4.2. I gotta get the specs. Something like that. So let's see here. Can we? There we go. So this is a, like I said, glass blasted and stone washed. Fun times. So I'm going to set this up, and then we're going to hammer some fucking nails. So 1 sec. Okay, we're back. And I forgot to get the numbers, but anyway. So, knife, right? Nails. These are common nails. These are 1.5 inch. 1.5 inch. Just common nails. Good times, right? I don't recommend you cutting nails with your knives. There will be some damage for sure. But how much? We're going to find out. Prior, let's get a little edge retention test. Oh, so slicey. Okay. So, this is an anvil. So, let's look. See where it struck? Now, can we see a little? I don't know if you can even see it. There's a teeny, the edge, the apex. Here, where's the paper? Right there. See right there? Jesus, I'm off camera. Sorry, I'm trying to tilt and do this. See right there how it's threading? So, let me see if I can show this. It's the very... Can you see right there? See the very apex right there? That's from hammering a fucking nail. Just so we're clear. Hammering a fucking nail. Okay? Steel nails. See the rust on that? And all we got was that little bitty bit right there. See that? Right there. So, try that with your other knives. See right there is where it's catching, right? Right there. Still cut. Now, let's do some pry tests. All right, so get a good. I want you guys to. This is a big old. Well, what this is? It's part of a pallet. It's part of a pallet. Steel comes in these things, so it's fairly heavy duty. I've done pry tests before, and we know how they end. Now, in my experience, every single knife that I've ever tested, once you get to about 125 thou, if you start going in past a ½ inch, is where it breaks. This is why I left this tip nice and robust. Now, this, again, so technically, right there is where it should bust. Right there. But we'll see. Okay, so, can we see? There you go. Can you see right there where it went in? Come here. See right there? So, I've got oil on this. So you can see actually where it's on. Let me re-wipe this. Hold on. So I don't want anybody to think I'm bullshitting. Okay? So it's shiny. So you'll see how far it goes in. So can you guys see? Okay. Can you see right there? See about a ½ inch right there in? Again, don't recommend this. A little further. See that right there? All the way back there? You see the chunks I'm taking out of this. So you can see, I want, you know, so you know I'm not bullshitting how far. So where is, somewhere. Everybody getting a sweet look at my back here. So we are, okay, there you go, it's perfect. Let's see. You actually see. So we are ½ inch in. Can you guys see that? ½ inch in and nothing. I mean, do you see how far that is? Tap that in further. Nothing. If anybody's watched my old videos, you know what usually happens once we get to the ½ inch mark. We usually get shit popping off and flying. Tips come off. It's usually bad. Blades bend. So this is still straight. Let's do one more for good luck. Nothing. Now, I'm sure if I hammered this like to here, I might be able to get something to bust. And maybe I'll take this off the handles and then see how far it takes to actually break it. But hold on. All right, there we go. Yeah, maybe I'll take the handles off or take one of these I haven't put handles on yet, because I wanted to have. If it's a new model and something I really like, I try to keep one just as like a benchmark of where I was at that time. So maybe I'll take one of these and I will take it until it fully fucking snaps and see how much that takes. But there you go. I want you to see that again right there. There you go. That's what came off. It's not even the bevel. That's what came off at 20 thou behind the edge, hammering a steel nail at 62 Rockwell. Again, this is not a thick knife. I bet I get twice the damage if I did 1095 or 1084 at fucking 60 whatever fucking 58 Rockwell. So, and you can see how far that was going in. Like I said, maybe I'll do a thing where I keep hammering it to here, see how far I can go before it finally fucking snaps somewhere down here. It'll probably bend before it snaps, but. So there we go. I wanted to do some just quick impact testing, because technically this isn't, we consider the tip thing toughness, but it's not. It's actually a strength test, because what I'm doing is I'm bending, so you've got compressive and tensile strength is what it is, because we're bending it. But it's still a toughness thing people like to see. This right here would be impact. We're here, boom, impact to the spine, impact to that, with a dead blow, and that's all we got. That right there. Sharpen that out in a couple passes. Because this stuff sharpens up fucking awesome, by the way. So yeah, there we go. Want to do some quick toughness testing. Bust out some tips, hammer some nails, see what happens. What was I going to say? That's it. Yeah, that's all I can really think of. If you're interested in one of these, like I said, I'm going to put this video up Friday. Try to put it up Friday. On Sunday, the 24th, I'll send an email out. I'll put the email for my Shopify shop in the bottom if anyone's interested. I didn't make a bunch of these. I made a few of them for anybody that might want one. They'll be in this exact configuration. You'll have the option. You could do acid, stonewash, glass blast, or just flat satin. Like I said, I made a couple of them. If anybody's interested in it, it'll be this Sunday, probably 3 or 4 o'clock. I'll have the drop, and they'll be up there. So if anybody wants one of those, they'll be this, like I said, this exact configuration, this gorgeous vintage toasted wheat linen micarta. So, but there you go. That is Pro Cut with the toughness heat treat protocol at 62 Rockwell. I'll see if I can flash in the Rockwell testing number right here. So there, hopefully I put in the Rockwell testing number. 62 Rockwell, hammering nails, twisting under, twisting it into thick wood. I just wanted to showcase the versatility of the steel, because I just really truly, like I said, I'm not trying to sound like a spokesman for it. I'm not the one who made the steel or get paid off of it, but I wasn't expecting much from this steel. I thought it was just going to be another low alloy tool steel, but it ended up being, again, this is really, especially makers that are watching this, like really buy a bar and try it, because I think it's going to just, like it just shits on everything else. You've got, like I said, you've got, what I really should do is, maybe resharpen this, do an edge retention test, and see what this heat treat protocol at 62 does compared to the edge retention protocol, which we did before, which is with a much thinner knife. But it's the best of both worlds. You've got extremely high toughness. I want to say it's somewhere at 62, it's somewhere in the 35 to 40 foot-pound range or something like that. So you've got very tough steel at a higher Rockwell. So you can give the benefits of edge retention, of the knife actually keeping an edge for a decent amount of time at 62 or even 61 and get it even, like I said, if you do the full-blown, I did cryo, so that's why this is at 62. I believe the same heat treat protocol gives you 60.5, 61 with no cryo, but you get crazy high toughness. So like I said, you're in the 40, in the 40s foot-pound ranges of toughness. You're up there with all these other simple carbon steels that would get that rating at like 60. So you're getting way better edge retention and just as much toughness for stuff like this. Where why wouldn't you want? Sorry. Why wouldn't you want the added edge retention and the added strength? That's the other thing maybe I should really talk about. Like I said, the tip not busting or anything like that, that's strength, right? So because when we bend something like that, right, you've got, tensile strength on the top and then you have compressive strength going at the bottom. That's strength. Hardness is direct. I know someone's going to try to play semantics and argue details with me, but for all intents and purposes, hardness is directly correlated to the strength of the steel. The stronger the steel, the more abuse it's going to be able to take with prying and stuff like that. So this is why you'll never see me making any of these. But even when I was doing 3V, it was at 62. I'm going to give the steel the strength it needs to hold that apex for cutting, but also the strength to do tougher stuff like prying, boring, prying, stuff like that. I want that apex to be able to hold up. If let's say you decide you're out hunting and you got to skin something with this, and this has got to rack up against some bone, it needs the strength in the apex to hold it. It needs the strength at the tip. Make a really, really tough steel. Make aluminum super tough. Make a knife out of aluminum and watch it bend. I don't want things to bend. I want them to hold up. So for this steel, again, in a bushcraft sense where you're going to beat on it, 62, you got sky-high toughness relative to that hardness, and you're going to get the edge retention and the sharpenability. Again, this is a low alloy tool, so it sharpens up like fucking insane. You have great toughness, great sharpenability, so you can sharpen it on a river rock out in the fucking field, which I've still yet to see anybody actually do that and put a decent edge on anything, but you sharpen it on your fucking river rocks, and you get the toughness and the edge retention. So, Pops Pro Cut, toughness protocol. Makers, get you some Pro Cut. Any bushcraft guys, get you one of these if you want one. Like I said, the store thing's in there if anybody's looking for it. Next week, S90V. We have some S90V to do. That should be fucking fun. So, see y'all later. Have a great week.